that I deeply respected. We'll call him Matthew. Matthew was, in my eyes, the man. He was great at basketball. Whenever we would play, he was always one of the best. He was a bit older than me, so all the more his talents were more clear. He was an amazing musician. He could play guitar, he could play drums, he could play bass. Still one of the best musicians I know to this day. He taught me who Eddie Van Halen was, if you know that generation at all. He was the one that was able to show me how to play those riffs, even though I never was able to, but he did show me. He is one of the best storytellers that I know. One of the funniest guys that I know to this day. He was a pre-med student at Northwestern. I had a pretty girlfriend. And he was my Bible study leader. And so all the more, I had mad respect for this guy. We got closer in my early years in high school as he was my Bible study leader. I went over to his house one day and he had a game console that I wanted to play with. And so I was playing with it. I forget what it was, maybe a Sega, or I'm not sure if PlayStation had come out at that time, but I was enthralled by the game. And he asked me, if I wanted to borrow it for a week. I was like, yeah, can I borrow it? So I borrowed it. I lived about an hour from the church that I attended. And then I brought it back the next week, playing it very well. And I brought it back, and the Bible study leader, that guy, Matthew, he wasn't there. And so I didn't know what to do. So I just, and this was not in the era of mobile phones and cacaos and phone calls, so he just wasn't there. And so I brought it back home. I get a call around 10 p.m. And it's Matthew. He's saying, hey man, where's the console? I was like, I brought it to church, but you weren't there. And then for about 5 minutes, he just starts yelling at me. Just yelling and yelling and yelling. And I still remember it because I was so shocked. In that moment, our relationship was completely broken. Although he still tried to be nice to me, my view of him was completely shattered. And my question to you this day is, how is it that someone who is so gifted, so athletic, so smart, so insightful, who is a committed Christian, he's a committed Christian to this day, how is it that someone with all those gifts, with all that intuition, with all that awareness, being so committed to God, how can someone be so off? You know of people yourselves who claim to be Christian, who claim that they know who Christ is. They try to live it out, but something within them is so off. As I describe this person, you may feel like that might be you, that you've been a Christian for a long time, but yet there's cracks within your heart that you are scared if other people found out. And that's what we want to address today. Why is it that certain Christians, they struggle and they struggle and they struggle, but they never, in one sense, break through? They're never able to kick those old habits. Open up your Bibles to Luke 10. Luke 10 is where we are at today. And we're in a series right now called Habits of Godly People. If you need a Bible, we have several Bibles in the back. If you don't have one, it's your Bible for you to keep. It's our gift to you. But in this passage, we'll read about two people, Mary and Martha. And in this passage, you'll see that being in the very presence of Christ, Mary and Martha, they were in the very presence of Christ, but being in the very presence of Christ, one of them completely misses Christ. And I think that's a picture of a lot of us as a Christian. We go to church, we know what's right, we try to do what we should do, but in the midst of it, we continue to actually miss God. And in this passage, what we will see is, what is it within our hearts? Jesus will address it. What is it within your heart that continues, it's this habit that you have, that you continue to miss God? Luke 10, 38 to 42. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening and listen to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving as she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." What we're going to look at today is this habit that I think is so important for us to bring into our lives. It's what I will call slowing down. The habit of slowing down. So if you look in your notes inside the bulletin, you'll see there is an acrostic, SLOW. This is what we'll be going through today. It's what I mean by slowing down. Just doesn't mean just to slow down life, but I mean a certain thing when I say slow your life down. And the first thing that we're going to see is to still your heart. Martha's problem was not that she was serving. Martha's problem, if you look carefully, is that she is distracted. Verse 40. But Martha was distracted. You could end that with anything. Martha was distracted with the boy. Martha was distracted with work. Martha was distracted with looking pretty, whatever it could be. But Martha, in this situation, is distracted with much serving. She went up to him, to Jesus. And here's a tip. Whenever you're telling Jesus what to do, it tells you something is off with your heart. "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." Whenever you're in that place of prayer and you're telling God what to do, chances are there's something off with your life. Okay, that's just a tip. Verse 41, but the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha." And what does he point out? "You are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her." What does Jesus do to help Martha see that she's distracted? He points out two very simple things. He points out to Martha her emotions. You're anxious. Anxiety is an emotion. Troubled is a state. What he's doing is he's helping Martha see what he sees. That through your emotions, you're able to see what's actually going on in your heart and in your life. And so as Jesus is pointing out her emotions to her, what the Spirit will do today is point out your emotions. Your emotions are a window into your heart. You have to still your heart. You have to be like Mary to let him in, listen to him, to learn. But in that, the next thing is after you still your heart, you pause for a moment. You have that paradigm shift. Every time I pray, there's a paradigm shift. That as I see the world and as I see me being in the center of the world, every time I close my eyes, there's this paradigm shift that happens every time that God is God. I'm just a person here in this world, and I see my role in that. Every time I pray, that's what happens. It's that shift that happens. That's what happens when you still your heart. You let God be God, and you let yourself be yourself. But in that, as God's trying to minister to you, as God's trying to get through to you, what he's going to do often is to tell you, listen to your heart. That's what God is doing to Martha. You are anxious. He's helping her to see. You are anxious. What you just said to me, you said for a reason. You are anxious and you are troubled. Emotions reveal what's in your heart. The Bible says that the heart is deceiving. Who can understand it? But as Jesus comes, he uses emotions often. He helps us to see what's really in our hearts by addressing our emotions, by addressing our fears, by addressing our desires. And in this, he shows to her that you have emotions. And these emotions are a window into your heart. I have a picture here of an iceberg. This is a regular iceberg. And what you see here is the iceberg being the whole thing, but what we see with our eyes is often, usually, almost always, is that about 10% that's above the water. This is your emotion. These are your actions. It's what's actually coming out of the water, coming out of your heart, and you choose to do what you do, and that's the 10%. And so what we have done often is we see the 10%, we see what's wrong. We see our emotions. We see all these different aspects. And what we try to do is simply work on the 10%. And what Jesus is doing, he's addressing the 10% that shows the distress, the anxiety, the troubled state. But then he goes back to the more important thing. And that's how he addresses Mary. You have chosen the good portion, because Mary in her heart has done the right thing. We think of our Christianity. We think of our faith. We think of trying to be better. And what we often do is we read the Bible, we pray. But if you're not aware of what's actually going on in your heart, what you'll always be doing, if you're not aware of what's going on in your heart, if you just continue these habits, hear me carefully, what you'll always be doing if you're not aware of what's in your heart is you'll always be working on that 10%. You'll always be working on that 10%. You'll be making, little ice sculptures. You'll be making little snowmen up there, trying to make that 10% look as good as possible. You'll be making little olas, right? Up there, you'll be doing what you can to make that 10% look good. And so often when you think about, oh man, my walk with God is so off, what do you think about? You're thinking about changing your 10%. You're thinking about changing this habit, changing this behavior. I should go to church on Sunday. That's how we think. I should read my Bible. Changing the 10%. We try to clean up our lives and make that 10% as glorious as possible. But what does Jesus do? He addresses her emotions. He wants Martha to see her heart. If you and I, if we are people who cannot see what's going on inside of our hearts, we will never change. Because all you will do is, as you read the Bible, you could be sincere and genuine. If you're not fully aware of what's going on in your heart, you'll never let God in to the deepest, darkest crevices of your heart. Understanding your emotions is a way to understand your heart. And when you understand your heart, that's when you can go to God with everything. Saying, this is who I am, God. Search me and know me. This is who I am. Every time you see your emotions, it's an opportunity to see your heart. It's an opportunity to grow. But if you grew up in a home where maybe your father was more distant, maybe for whatever reason your culture has told you emotions are negative, what you will do then is you'll start to suppress your emotions. You'll start to think of emotions as simply a bad thing. But whenever you find people who suppress their emotions and they go through something tragic, every time when they go through something tragic, they're worse off. They become jaded. Their worldview has to change because what they think and how they see the world does not match how they feel. How many of you know someone who has gone through that tragic state? For a lot of us, we have several people in our mind, maybe an aunt or an uncle, maybe a cousin, maybe a friend. They went through something tragic. They weren't emotionally aware what's going on. And as they went through it, they started to disengage. They became more jaded in life. They couldn't process what was going on. They started to have an addiction so that they can cope with life. And what happens to that person? Always what happens to that person is in one sense, they become less human. They can't love well. They can't sympathize. There's no joy. But many of you also know someone who has gone through that tragic experience in life, but they were emotionally healthy. They were committed Christians, but also they were emotionally healthy. So in that moment of breaking, they know what they're going through. And as they know what they're going through, they're not running away from the pain, but they actually enter into the pain, opening up their hearts and saying, God, this is who I am. I need you so much. I'm so broken. I'm so desperate. Every time you see your emotion, especially when they're the flood of emotions that come up, it's always a window into your heart saying there's something valuable that may be taken away. You're scared. Or whenever there's extreme joy, it's saying, I'm getting what I want. So Jesus, as he wants to address Martha and her situation, what he does is something very, very simple. Martha, you're anxious about many things. You're troubled. The call is to still our hearts, but then to listen to our hearts. And we need to have a change in how we see our emotions, because as we see that it's a window into our heart, in the past, the way that you may have thought about it is if you have emotions, you're weak. If you have emotions, if you get lonely, if you get sad, it's a sign of your weakness. And so what you've tried to do is you've tried to suppress it, saying, well, that's not how I feel. And you try to cover it with different antidotes. You try to add on different actions into your life to cope with it. And that's how addictions start to grow. Because you're not addressing the heart, you're just trying to cover the pain. But the emotions are very real. God in scriptures is full of emotion. Peter Scazzero says this. He says in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, a book that really has impacted me. He says this one statement that I've never forgotten. He says, if you are not emotionally healthy, you cannot be spiritually healthy. If you're not emotionally aware of what's going on in your heart, no matter how devoted you are, what you're doing, if you're not aware of what's going on inside of your heart, when you go to God, you're going to God with that 15%, the 30% that you know of your heart. But you're not going to God with everything of who you are. But once you're able to really know your heart, your desires, your cravings, your urges, your idols, and you go to God with it, that's when God can meet you, restore you, redeem you, and heal you in the deepest and darkest of places. If you're emotionally stunted, you'll always be spiritually stunted. There will always be a gospel, a truncated work within your heart. This is why those people who have these emotional struggles, they have a hard time really loving people. There's no joy in their hearts because there's decay in their hearts. There's something in their hearts that's continuing to eat away at them, but they've never addressed it. They're impatient. If you struggle with impatience, it's one of the issues of being emotionally unhealthy, not letting God into those aspects of your heart. People with tempers, people who struggle with depression, often have something to do with areas within their hearts that God still has not addressed. I want to be sensitive to that because I know there's also physical reasons for it, but often it always starts with the heart. And this is the trigger. If you have a hard time sympathizing with people, it's often a sign that you're not emotionally healthy. Because emotionally healthy people, they know what pain is. And it's only because they've gone through pain and how hard it is, and they've lived through it, they've let their heart grieve. It's in that state they're able to now see someone in pain and also sympathize, saying, I understand what that feels like. Ways in which, you can write this down, ways in which you can listen to your heart. Ask yourself these questions. What do you want? That emotion is telling you what you want. If you're sad, you're sad that you didn't get it. If you're anxious, you're scared something's going to take it away. What do you want? What do you fear? What does it mean to you? And why does it mean something to you? When you're scared, when you're filled with anxiety, I think about Martha. When Martha is filled with anxiety, it's so interesting because she's filled with anxiety serving Jesus. Do you see the irony in that? She's serving Jesus. So she's got the right God in place, right? She's got the right God in place, but the wrong gospel. It's performance. In my mind, my diagnosis is that for Martha, She's trying to please Jesus by her performance, as opposed to simply being a child in need of her father, of a savior. So for her, you see that, which leads us to our third point. Other gods and other gospels. After you listen to your heart, you hear your emotions, what's going to point you to is other gods and other gospels. So this is kind of the thing that I want us to be thinking about when we still our hearts, when we slow down in that day. After lunch, you get back to your desk. You have about 15 minutes before that meeting. To just slow down your heart, still your heart. And in that, start to figure out, what was my morning like? What emotions did I go through? Because it's going to be in that process of everyday struggles, everyday pain, everyday joys that's real. When you go to God with that, what happens is the gospel becomes real for that day. And so the struggles that you had for that morning, when that guy at work said something or looked at you in that funny way, and there's all these questions or emotions that start to, well up within you. If you think about it, you start to think, well, why did I feel that way? And as you start to figure out why you felt that way, you start to realize that you have a fear of man. You have a fear of people's opinions. It drives you to do certain things. It drives you to lie. It drives you to do certain things. So it's in it, which leads to our next point. Other gods and other gospels. As you listen to your heart, those emotions will start to reveal to you what's important in your heart. Other gods and other gospels. I'm going to share this point, and I'm going to finish the outline, and then I'm going to share with you real-life situations as we close. Other gods and other gospels. Verse 42, Jesus says it very, very clearly. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. What Jesus is saying to Martha is, Mary, your sister, she's chosen the good thing. What's he inferring? What's the indictment against Martha? Martha, you have not chosen the good thing. You've chosen this other God, or for her, this other gospel. The indictment is for Martha, being in the presence of Jesus, she approaches Jesus the wrong way. It's the indictment against her. The anxiety within her should have revealed to her she doesn't know God's love for her. And whenever you build your life on these idols, your life will always be filled with anxiety. Always. Whenever you build your life upon false gods, false hope, you will never have security. Because if it is that it's marriage that you want, what happens when that marriage struggles? There's anxiety that wells up. Your emotions really reveal to you your heart, the state that it is. And it's this everyday occurrence. Every day we go through these emotions, whether you're aware of it or not. Some of you have no idea what emotions you've gone through in the past day, past week. When you think about all the things that you actually go through within what it actually reveals to you in every moment, things that you trust in, things that you find value in that is not God, and you continue to put your hope there. And that's how, as a Christian, not only is there joy for the salvation given to you way back when, for many of you, when you make that choice, but also reveals to His saving grace to you in that moment, in that time. That is how, for the Christian, the gospel never becomes stale. It's always new, and it's always refreshing. What are some of these other types of gods and gospels? Image. Especially in Korea, image. How you look. Family or family status. Getting married. Being married means something to you, which is why many of us struggle with it. Being married means that I'm finally lovable. I'm finally loved. Career status. When I gain a certain amount of status, that's when I am significant. Finances. Achievement. Social standing. Romantic relationships, approval of certain people. What's so interesting is some people care about every person's opinion. Other people, they don't care about anyone's opinion but two people, their wife and their mom, right? So when you think about it, all of us have different idols, different struggles. Even your morality, how you act as a Christian, how you perform as a Christian can be what your false gospel is. Any standard of perfection, these are the things that we can give ourselves to. Keller, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, on the very first page, he lists out what happened in 2008. Because this world, we continue to live after different gods, whether you're religious or not. You continue to live after a certain status or a certain standard, that once that crumbles, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. In 2008, with an economic crisis, the CFO of Freddie Mac, all these high-level executives, they committed suicide. The CFO of Freddie Mac hung himself in his basement. The CEO of Sheldon Good, another U.S. Real estate auction firm, shot himself in the head behind his red Jag. A French money manager who invested the wealth of many of Europe's royal and leading families, what he did is when he lost that money, he slit his wrist and died in his Madison Avenue home. And the list goes on. What it shows to us is that we, as people, we will continue to build our life upon these other gods and other gospels in such a way that for us as Christians, or even if you're speculating about Christianity, what you will see in this world is when we start to build our life and build our foundation upon something that's faulty, at any moment when that can be taken away, there's fear, there's anxiety. And as much as medicine as you want to take, or whatever it would be, as the ways in which you want to cope with it, you will never have security because you've built your life upon something that is faulty. So once you recognize these idols, these convictions, you confess it, you bring it to the Lord, which will lead you to change, which is the last point, worship. When you still your heart, when you slow down your heart, you want to end always in worship. But verse 42. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Choose the one thing, is what Jesus is saying to Martha. Choose the one thing. Quit choosing and picking and building your life upon something that will fall short. And what worship is in the midst of you continuing to build your life on all the false things, what worship genuinely is you see God for who He is. The glory actually means weight. The weight of God, the greatness of God, the bigness of God, as that settles into your hearts, it's like a big rock entering into a big stone, entering into a reservoir, where all the water will flow out because God in His glory sits center into your heart. That's worship. As that happens, the scales of sin falls off you. I want to share this in closing with an image. I need 3 volunteers. And if I can get a few volunteers, and if possible, just for the sake of the illustration, if I can get someone who's very, very tall, very, very average, and someone more petite. So feel free, there's no, we're all family here now. If you see someone who is very tall next to you, you can encourage him to come up. I see one head that's taller than everyone else here. But if I can get 3 volunteers, someone who is a little bit on the petite end, someone you think is average, and then someone who is a little bit taller. And basically, this is how I want to end our time together. So are you the petite one? He is our petite brother. Can I get 2 more volunteers? 2 more volunteers. Thank you. Thank you. So Brandon, if you can go towards the left. Don't worry, you don't have to do anything embarrassing. Not yet. And let's get their names.
Amy.
Hello, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Sandra.
Hi, Sandra.
Brandon.
They're scared of you. they weren't as kind to you. But this is what happens in your life. Potentially something that could have happened in your life. If you recognize, I know I kind of flew through today's sermon because I know there's a lot of information, but I wanted to get to this last point because it's going to help you understand what it means to actually slow down in life, and if we don't slow down, what can potentially happen. So hello, Amy. Amy, this is, for the sake of, we'll pretend Amy is 13 years old. Okay? So at the age of 13, this is your heart. It's the iceberg that I showed you, right? I drew it myself. And this is the 10% that you see when you're 13, right? It's the iceberg's a little bit smaller. You don't really haven't lived life long enough that you know what's going on. But at the age of 13, Amy, one day she is walking, and some guy offers her delicious cookies. So at the age of 13, she takes one cookie, eats the cookie, falls in love with the cookie, and is therefore now addicted to delicious cookies. At the age of 13. Well, at the age of 13 is also when you start to get interested in different things and different, hobbies and desires. Let's say at this age, she starts to feel lonely. So whenever she feels lonely, what does she do? She goes and gets that delicious cookie. And so in her heart, as she continues to feel maybe loneliness or rejection or pain, what starts to happen is you start to, within these parts of your heart, there's these little cookie idols that you start to create. And so every time you feel sad or lonely, what you start to fill your heart with is false gospels or false gods that will never satisfy you, right? So these little cookies that she's continued to take into her life. But what starts to happen is as you take in these cookies and you make it a part of your heart, as much as she wants to keep this clean, what starts to happen on a bad day, when someone cuts her off on the road, she shouldn't be driving when she's 13. But what starts to happen is little cookie trees, fruit start to form. As much as she tries to chop that away, it'll continue to grow. Why? Because there's parts of her heart that she has not addressed. In that, let's say later on, at the age of 14, she hears about this great new church plant in Itaewon, right? And she comes out to this great new church, and she hears the gospel for the first time. And she hears that when you give your life to delicious cookies over and over again, it will always set you up for disappointment. And she realizes, oh no, I've set up my whole life based upon eating and getting delicious cookies. She realizes, oh, this is so wrong. I'm going to set myself up for failure. And then in that, she hears the gospel. She hears God's love for her. So what starts to happen is these different ways in which she's covered her heart with these cookies. The gospel will start to cover. But she's still emotionally very unhealthy. I'm sorry, Amy. So she's still emotionally very unhealthy. So what starts to happen is there's parts of her heart the gospel never penetrates to. And so Amy grows up and is now a little bit older. And so her iceberg is a little bit bigger. Hello, Amy. So as she's grown up in life, every time she's gotten sad, every time she's kind of depressed, as much as she knows Christ is the one that restores her, her practical gospel, what she actually does, is that she eats cookies. And so with 10 years of life now, 13 to 23, what starts to happen is there's cookies all filled in the heart. But because she is a Christian, Christ has entered into her. So there still is the cross. But there's still parts of her life that she has not fully given to God. And so in her 10% that you see on a Sunday or in small groups, when she tries to put her best self forward, what you'll see is parts of the fruit of the cross forming in her life and in her heart. But also what you will see is every once in a while, on a bad day, she'll rage at her kids. Not that grown-up Amy ever does, but there's now these the fruit of the cookies and how she's built her life here. And so what she tries to do is, because she knows that this is wrong, she'll just try to take these cookies away, but never addressing what's going on in her heart. But then, at the age of 23, she comes to Gospel City. She's continued to come here 10 years later. Here's a message about what it means to address these issues within her heart. So now a light bulb has hit. Oh, emotions are good. I need to address my emotions. I need to bring to God everything that I'm going through and let Him minister to every part of my heart. So what will start to happen is all the false gospel that she's based her life on will start to be broken down, and the cross will start to invade. But yet, there's still parts of her heart that is still not addressed because it takes time. 10 years later, Amy is huge. So Amy, at 33, she's learned this idea that yes, the gospel is the one that changes everything, is what changes everything. It's Jesus that changes everything. But I need to allow God to enter into every part of my heart. And so what will start to happen is now the heart's bigger. He's lived life. There's more pains. There's more brokenness, more disappointments. And so with it, there's tendencies where he will have this desire to build his life upon these cookies. But as someone who has understood that as you allow God to enter into every part of your life, what should happen is the cross becomes that much bigger. The reason for my friend, Matthew in the beginning, the reason for many of us, we've been a Christian for quite some time, but you still start to see, why am I not changing? I'm committed, I come to church, I read the Bible, I pray. What is it about my heart? I still have these addictions or whatever, these deep-seated insecurities. The reason you haven't changed is the same as Martha. Jesus has to point out these emotions that you have, because these emotions will trigger these different idols that you have created. And every time something is about to be taken away or something is threatened, your reaction will be to cover it up by your own flesh. But whenever you have these emotions, what you're supposed to do, for Martha, what she's supposed to do is realize, I've come to God all wrong. I've built my life on all these different things. So as you acknowledge sadness, so for Amy, as she was sad as a 13-year-old, and she created this habit of eating this cookie. What she will want to do as a 33-year-old is still within her heart, because we're a heart on a stick and not a brain on a stick. What we'll want to do is we'll want to eat the cookie. But that's when you say, God, I have all this anxiety. I have all these fears. I have no idea what life will be like tomorrow. When this is being threatened, you'll want to do everything possible to take life into your own hands. But when the anxiety shows up, when the fear shows up, when the sadness shows up, what you're supposed to do is you go to God with it, saying, God, this is my fear. God, I'm so scared that this might happen. I think about the Whitmans when they were going through everything. what do? You don't run away. You don't drink your life away. You go to God and say, God, I'm so scared. I'm so scared that baby may be taken away. And you sit there and you let your mind understand who God is and His goodness. And it's going to be in that place. Still, the future is unknown. It's going to be in that place. Whatever happens, you know it'll be okay. And so these different parts where you've often given yourself to different idols, you slowly, one day at a time, one struggle at a time, you go to God with that emotion. God, I'm scared. God, I'm lonely. God, I feel so unlovable because of this, or this. I feel so insignificant. But as you go to God with it, and it's in that place, as God reminds you, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the disappointment, His love for you, you start to take the gospel for what it is. You stop living your life not based upon false gospels, but you let Christ be center. It's through your emotions, it's a window into your heart. You start to see your other gospels and other gods. And it's going to be in that place every day, several times a day. When you see your emotions, you simply go to God with it. You pray and you go to God with it, letting God minister into your heart. Thank you. You can be seated. In closing, I'm going to read this one verse, these few verses. In Matthew 23, there's a statement of woes, a statement of curses in one sense, that Jesus tells the Pharisees. Listen to these verses. Matthew 23, verse 25 and 26. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! And listen to the accusation. For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are still full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee. What's the accusation? You're blind. You can't see your heart. Because these Pharisees, I would say for a lot of them, they probably had actually good intentions. They wanted to do right with God, but they did not understand their heart. You blind Pharisee. First clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything flows out of your heart. How do you change the tip of that iceberg? You only change the tip of the iceberg by actually addressing the heart. How do you address the heart? You recognize your emotions. We all have emotions. It triggers, it reveals what we love, these other gods and other gospels. You bring that to God. You let God and the cross tell you your identity, your value. You sit there daily, reminding yourself of who you are, no matter how deep that struggle is. And it's going to be in that place. I guarantee you, church, it's going to be in that place 1 year later, 5 years later. You start to see real change, real love flow out, real joy flow out, real patience flow out. I read that book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, about third year into my marriage. The first 3 years of our marriage was really hard. I read this book, I was challenged. If you're not emotionally mature, you can never be spiritually mature. I read that book. About 3 months later, my wife comes up to me. She says, you're different. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, you're just different in a good way. Everything that she was trying to tell me for the past 3 years, I was trying to change the iceberg, the 10%. But when I heard this, because for me, my testimony is I thought emotions were bad. If I felt lonely, I felt weak. And so I would just get angry after that. No, this is not me. And I would just have these anger issues. Realizing this, I realized I'm broken. These emotions reveal this need within me. So every time I got sad, I let myself be sad. I went to Jesus, reminded myself of who I am before Him. And it's day by day, moment by moment, He restored my heart. They say today, More Christians are killed from being busy than bullets. I wonder for how many of us who are struggling in our spiritual life simply because we're busy. Can we be a church regularly? We slow down, we pause, we still our hearts, listen to our hearts, go to God, go to Him with all of the baggage that we have, and end in worship daily, regularly throughout the day. As that happens, I guarantee you, people will recognize a difference within you, and it's going to be in that place you're becoming the person God has destined you to become. Let's pray.